After choosing empowerment over dread, I began searching for meaningful and effective solutions to put into practice in my own life. Progressive Hedonist is a podcast to share the ways we can take on climate change through food and joy. On days when this seems completely impossible, this podcast is a reminder that each of us can make an impact. I'm Dana Cowan. Join me in conversations with thought leaders like Alice Waters, Andrew Zimmern, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and more. We can learn together what is possible. You can listen anywhere podcasts can be found and join the conversation on Instagram at progressive_hedonist.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. It's Tuesday, November 12th, 2024, and we're winding down here. The year's, it's can't believe it's almost Thanksgiving, so we're going to talk about what you can do next year on the Inner Circle Beer Tours with the whole crew. The good friends, Joel and BR, who worked at Shelton Brothers for a long time, have a really great package of tours to some of our favorite breweries in Europe. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Something to think about for 2025. I think that's a good theme of today. So let's take it away. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host of Beer Sessions Radio. Thanks for listening for 15 years. And here's our guests. They're going to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm BR Rolia. I'm a brewery consultant, and I am also a tour guide with Inner Circle Beer Tours.
Hi, Christa Sobier, owner of Beer Witch.
Alan Rice, co-owner of City Swiggers Beer Shop. Joel Shelton, founder of Inner Circle Beer Tours, formerly a Shelton brother.
All right. Well, we've had a great run. We've been doing the show for 15 years. Big thanks to Roberta's Pizza in Bushwick, the host of the studio. The last few years, we're doing shows online as well as in the studio and even remote. Last year at this time, I was visiting friends in Copenhagen, and I recorded a few shows. So the potential is limitless, and we're really looking forward to the holidays with everyone. We started the night. Mike Amity, operations director at all the Roberta's Pizzas in New York, gave us something really cool from Suarez Family Brewing. It was I want to call it a showboat saison, but it was actually a buckwheat saison, and we loved it. What did you guys think of that first beer, BR?
Oh, it was very easy drinking, super balanced, very refreshing. I could have had the whole bottle to myself and been quite happy, but yeah. I shared. So
I know we have a lot of beers here. Joel, tell us a little bit of the theme. You know, you'd mentioned just how great the Inner Circle Beer Tour to Belgium was. Tell us a little bit about that trip, the theme. While we do that, we're going to, Christa and BR are going to pop some beers and tell us about it and take us through the tour through the liquid.
Well, the original idea, when we were Shelton Brothers, we started this tour branch of the company. We called it Insider. We called it Insider Tours at the time.
Oh, wow.
Which means that we know the brewers and all this, and we can take you on a tour and meet the brewers, and they're our friends, and they give us a nice hug when we get there. And so it's a different experience from any other kind of tour that goes to breweries and such. So obviously Shelton Brothers came crashing down with COVID, as did a lot of companies, and so I just wanted to keep it going. I wanted to make sure the people that were planning to go with Shelton Brothers got to go anyway with me. I'm even better because I'm just the best Shelton Brothers. So we go to one of the first tour we wanted to do was Belgium and France, because we were involved, as most people know, with a lot of really, really great brewers in both countries, and so we kind of straddled the border. And BR can tell you more about the breweries there. She was more closely involved with them, especially in France during the Shelton Brothers years. But I know these guys a long time because my brothers were friends with them since the 90s. So it's a pretty special trip, and I don't think it can be recreated by anybody else. And it's just a lot of amazing stuff in just a few days, and it's pretty overwhelming.
And your brothers' names are?
I don't...
Is Dan?
Yeah, Dan.
Will and Joel.
Dan and Will.
You guys think everybody knows you, but guess what?
No, I know.
Nobody knows you anymore.
I forgot. Nobody cares anymore.
Oh, yeah.
We're old now. But we were something back in the day, kids. You should have seen us. But we used to be a big importing company. Well, now we're not.
The tour, I'm going to give you the shout out. The tour is special because these long-term relationships you guys still get to go and have the contacts with. And seems like everyone in this room, except for myself, has been on the tour. So, BR, first tell us a little more about what the tour is, the Belgian tour.
So
And also what we're drinking right now.
So right now, Christa had brought this. This is Brasserie de la Seine from Brussels, the Saison de Mayboom. They release this once a year. It's an annual tradition, see if I can even remember, where they raise a tree in Brussels that has been going on for something like 1,000 years, this the tradition. But this one is... It's been so long since I haven't had this since the pre-pandemic, so you have to excuse me.
It's the
but
first time they released it since the pandemic.
oh, okay,
so,
well
yeah,
there we go.
it's
First time they've
exciting,
released it.
yeah.
So so we started, as Joel said, we wanted to bring people. We started initially with mostly just industry people, and then we wanted to bring people to the breweries that we had such a close relationship to, and that were maybe very small, maybe weren't getting as much attention as some of the bigger names, but still have amazing and wonderful beer. And so the idea was to put together this tour, and a lot of these places you can't get to without a car, pretty much all of them, except for the ones downtown Brussels. So we have a bus. You don't have to worry about driving, finding your way along little tiny country roads, or drinking all day long and having to get back in the car. And as Joel said, these people are like family to us. So for us, it's also really fun to go and just, you want to bring people and take, this is, my favorite spot here, or this is the beer here, or this is the dog that we like at this brewery. Or they have a brewery cat, and, it's a very meaningful way for us to reconnect with the brewers that we had imported. We have also added a few other stops that weren't part of the Shelton portfolio, but who we've either known just through the industry, or else who we found out like, oh, this could be a cool stop as well. But it's informative. Right now it's a mix, like I said, both industry and just beer lovers. It's informative. Brewers get to ask questions of the brewer. U.S. brewers ask questions of the foreign brewers.
Christa, why did you bring this beer?
This is a special beer from De La Seine. Again, they only release it once a year. And again, since it hasn't been released since the pandemic, it's very exciting. I just want to, piggyback off what you were saying about the tour and, this relationship that, the Shelton brothers have had with these small family-owned breweries. You go in there and it's like seeing family reunite, they're like hugging and crying and how are you? How's your grandmother? How's your son? It's just not something you're going to be able to do on your own. So I felt very privileged to be part of that and part of that inner circle.
And Alan, you were on the tour also?
Yeah, special thanks to Joel for dragging me over the line. He knew how badly I wanted to go, but as someone without a passport who hadn't left the country in a long time and barely able to travel at all, being a small business owner, I definitely needed my hand held. By the end, I felt I could have stayed an extra weekend, but at the beginning, I didn't know what was going on, so they really took care of me.
Oh, I was going to say that, Alan and Christa joined us on our most recent tour, which was in May. And this tour will be repeated again next May, 2025. Joel, what the dates? It's around the 12th to the 16th, is that right?
Yeah, we have something we usually have 5 intensive days of stuff, but we sort of start the Sunday before. We go Monday through Friday, and the Sunday before we do a little crawl in Brussels, so we count that a little bit. But mainly it's Monday through Friday. I think May 11th is the Sunday. May 12th is the Monday, I believe.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
It's good.
So it's a really beautiful time of year there too, to boot. So it's just a really fun trip all around.
Yeah. Back to Alan and Christa. So, some of the highlights, some of your favorite breweries that you visited.
Oh, again, I was just thinking earlier, if you plan around it, you can add to it. For example, if you go the weekend early, if it's the same as last year, the 12 hours of spa is going on in eastern Belgium, and you can, for a fraction of the price of Formula One, you can see the great track and spend the whole day there. And I met some people who'd come from there and were raving about it. So without even talking about the breweries and all. For as far as putting me on the spot for which...
But you must have been to a couple breweries on the trip. A couple that you liked or remembered.
One in particular, it was hard to get to, but we were glad. It was called Oberon. It was right, it's on the border, the French border. And we went down a very narrow road, and it
A
took
lot
a
of
while
bus
to get there.
adventures, yes.
Yes, and some cows were wondering what is this bus doing here? But once we got there, the meal was amazing, and the brewery tour was fantastic along this raging stream. It was a beautiful location.
Yeah, the Brasserie au Baron, it's they do sort of a hybrid saison bière de garde. So for the Belgian style saison, but the French bière de garde, which is in the same farmhouse category, same house, same family. But yeah, au Baron is in a tiny, tiny little village, a Goussigny, literally a stone's throw from Belgium. You could even just walk, take a little hike, and you're be in Belgium. But our bus driver, this is like, don't always rely on GPS, because I guess he saw it. I mean, literally a tractor path, and thought that this big old bus could get through. And it got to the point where we didn't know if we were going to make it, or we'd be stuck in farmlands for the rest of the day.
It was a good laugh.
Yeah.
But I just want to mention Oberon. It's in France, which is kind of an odd thing already for a beer tour, probably. And the thing is, we were very, very keen on a lot of the French breweries that were from that same region, which are essentially Belgian breweries. I mean, as far as style goes. And so it's equally interesting to go into France. And most so-called Belgian beer tours don't go into France because they only go to Belgium. So it's this theme. But our theme was, where's the great beer? And some of it's across the border.
I love that. Krista.
Yeah, and I would definitely say, even though the itinerary is jam-packed, add a few extra days. I wish I did. But the best thing for me is, again, small business owner, hard to get away, but I didn't have to think about anything. The transportation was handled, the meals were handled. I could just enjoy myself and, really take in this environment and be around everyone who obviously is on this tour is a huge beer enthusiast. So there are a lot of us in the industry there, which was great. And then also we met people from all over the country. And everyone was so nice. Like, we just had the best time.
Krista, think about one of the breweries you went to, and one that you've drinking the beer of. And was there a question that you had? I mean, I always wonder, like, what's the site like? What's the equipment like? Is it a cobwebby old farmhouse? I mean, you must have learned a lot by going to.
Oh yeah, it
breweries.
was great to see really them making it behind the scenes. And for me, meeting people like Thierry, Daniel Thierry, and now he's handing it off to his daughter, and like knowing like, wow, there's a whole new generation of brewers coming over, and female even, which was great. Great to see that. Great to see that transition. Great to see that enthusiasm, and great to see how they've been doing things. Yeah.
Beer, I feel like single-handedly, you guys, when you were Shelton Brothers, turned me on to Thierry. You want to tell us a little more about it?
So Thierry, it's another French brewery, also in the north of France, because that was traditionally the region where the climate was a little bit too cold for grapes, but hops and barley grew really well. And then there wasn't at that point, hundreds of years ago, there wasn't the border between France and Belgium. But Daniel Thierry, he used to work for a big supermarket chain. I believe he did HR, but really got into brewing, went to brewing school in Belgium, and came back to France and opened up in a tiny little farmhouse brewery, again, a very, very small town, which had been voted the most picturesque of the year, I believe, in 2023 or 2024. Every year they have a sort of it's not quite a reality TV show, but a TV show where everyone around the country in France gets to vote on what's the most picturesque city or town in France. So yeah, he's been brewing, again, sort of a mix of both bière de garde and saison styles. Thierry Extra, which is probably the one that you were introduced to, or were introduced to his beers with, Thierry Extra. It's a very, very hoppy for a French beer at that time. Very sessionable, only about 4% ABV. Dry hopped, which is also at the time was unusual. But yeah, he and his wife run the brewery and tasting room, and their daughter now, Clara, she and her husband Daniel officially retired from the brewery this year. He'll still show up on our tours to say hello, assume he's not, off gallivanting somewhere. But it's just a very warm opening. The tasting room is very picturesque with a lot of beer memorabilia. They get catering from a local caterer, which
That was
is
the best lunch we had.
that lunch was amazing.
It was so good.
And the year before, we had a delicious lunch. And this time when I was dealing with Clara, she said, I'm going to get something a little bit, that was fine, but it was kind of old-fashioned. I want to get something more modern. Like, no, you don't understand. For us, that was perfect. And then she outdid herself with a new caterer, and it's like local cheeses and local produce and the breads. And yeah, we could have
Yeah, I don't even like food, but the food on this tour is amazing. I mean, it's great. It's great. And so we want the tours to be more than just about going to breweries and swigging beer. So it has to be the whole lifestyle there that we can experience.
And this year we also stopped at a World War I cemetery. It was a British cemetery, but one of the largest Commonwealth cemeteries in the region, which is very moving because that whole area, was just basically destroyed during the two world wars. So that was, we tried to also add in little bits of like that aren't, where it's not just like beer, as fun as that is. Try to give a sense of the overall culture of it.
Jimmy, can I give you a background on why our tours are like that? It's inspired by my brother Dan, who used to take me around to these, usually in Franconia in Germany. He would drive me around and go brewery after brewery and drink all day because he's a huge guy. He could do it. And I found it ridiculous. So I said, when I get in charge of a tour, I'm not going to just go around drinking beer all day. We're going to go to these cemeteries, break it up a little bit, have a little food, which we never did with Dan. So that was a big inspiration to do what Dan didn't let me do.
I thought your brother Dan used to just ride his bike everywhere too, in between the drinking.
That's what he did sometimes.
Sometimes. Well, there's a lot of lore, and I don't want to date anyone because I want to know these things, but I want to hear more about what's now. I want to hear about Christa and Alan and some of the beers that they tasted and other inspirations they took back from this tour. Because if I'm going on this tour, like you just brought the De La Seine bottle. Did you go to De La Seine?
We did go to and I was telling BR earlier, like we are very lucky. I'm sure Alan and I had, beer store owners that we've had these beers, we've tasted them, but most of the people on the tour who live in other parts of the country have never had these beers. So to see them experience it for the first time, I mean, they were like going crazy, right? They were like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Where can I get this? And knowing they wouldn't be able to get it in, Colorado or whatever, they were just, buying suitcases of it to take it home. And, and I'm like, wow, we're so lucky to be able to taste that. But I also know how special it was. Like I remember, one of the free times I had in Belgium, I was like, oh, I'll get a beer. But you can't even get these small family brewery beers in, Brussels. Like it's small even there. You know what I mean? So that's
what was De La Seine like? We were in the north of France. Now we're back in Belgium.
So De La Seine has opened up in Brussels. It's one of only a few breweries. I think when they did open, they might have only been the second brewery after Cantillon that was at the time. There's now some more breweries have opened. But Yvan de Batz, who used to do some work at Cantillon, is a beer historian, extremely knowledgeable, and probably one of the nicest people you'll meet, but so many people on this tour are also the nicest people you'll meet. A very welcoming, generous person. He had to fly out to a beer fest in Italy, but he made sure he had the time to stay with, give us a talk, even though he was probably needed to pack and everything else. But the brewery, when we first started the tours, it was in a place a little bit further on the outskirts of town. He's now more centrally located in what has become, it's not quite an industrial park. It's a multi-use area now where there's like breweries and shops and light manufacturing. And so he has probably one of the more modern breweries.
Yeah, it was like an American brewery.
Yeah, that you'll see on the tour. But they've also now got a little restaurant that had just opened up that is run by a top chef who he's French, has a place out in Lille, but also in Brussels, uses only products from Belgium and the north of France, which means there's a lot of things, there's no citrus, obviously. Very, very unique food, but which meant the food that they're serving at the brewery is meant to pair with the beers, and all of Yvonne's beers are extremely balanced, extremely well made.
Like oysters or...
No, it was more just like bar food, but for example, the frites were served with a mayo that was made with some sort of charred vegetable, so it came out in this gray color but had a smoky character to it. I'm not sure I can't remember if they were scallions or what sort of, but it was, I don't know. Did you guys have that smoked mayo?
I do remember that.
Yeah,
just like it's gray.
Yeah. It looked a little odd,
but it's delicious.
But it's delicious. Yeah. So I mean, I remember there was some kind of falafel. As I don't eat meat, so I think they also had burgers and some other chicken sandwiches. But I mean, the guy's restaurant downtown Brussels is much more fine dining but this is just meant to pair with the beer without it just being an afterthought.
And then remind us of some of the beers that De La Seine makes that we can get in this country.
Taras Bulba is probably his flagship beer.
Most famous, probably.
Yeah, Zinnebeer is another one. And then some other, those are probably the two main beers, and then there's other ones that come in seasonally, like the Saison de Mayboom.
The Zen Pill is pretty.
Yeah, the Zenapils now.
The pills. Alan, do you carry any of the De La Seine at your shop, City Swiggers?
Sure, they come in occasionally, hopefully more often. But yeah, we always have at least one or two on the shelf.
So I don't think we've ever had you on as City Swiggers.
Briefly,
Maybe.
at the gate, you had a show there several years ago. I did get to pop in at that one.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your shop, City Swiggers. It's in Manhattan.
Yeah, Upper East Side, 86th Street, right at the Q train. Well, we got to watch that being built several years ago. We're having our 13th anniversary this week. We've survived through ups and downs.
Yeah. So of these other breweries in Belgium that you guys visited in France, which others do you carry?
There's one we've had briefly. I hope they bring it back. That's from the town of Ypres. I guess they. The name of the beer is Wipers because that's what the English called it. And that town was pretty much ground zero in World War I. It was completely destroyed, and they've spent 100 years rebuilding it in the old way, along the old paths. And about the only thing that survived the bombardment was the city walls, which were, 50, 60 feet thick in certain places. And we saw a brewery there, actually really small. It's amazing that the beer has made it to the U.S.
Into the like a cave or a mountain? Yeah.
No, it was built into the side of the wall.
Yeah.
They used the walls, the city walls. And
Which brewery was that, guys? Do you know?
It's called Kazematen, which is the Flemish word for casemates, if I'm not mistaken. Casemates being the city walls of Ypres. And it used to be a barracks for the British soldiers. And it's, as Alan said, it survived. It's this huge, thick, it's really beautiful. It's like this big cave. And we used to go to a restaurant there, which closed, unfortunately, but there's a little brewery in there now. So it's just a beautiful atmosphere in there. And you expect those beers to be in the U.S.?
No, we can't get them.
I wouldn't think so.
They came in once as a box set.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
A couple of years ago. But yeah, there's a pretty much like a walking trail park along the top of this the wall. It's
I was going to say, for me, more and more, part of the experience is being in these beautiful cities when you're drinking the beer. And it means something to actually be there and do it rather than just have it here in your shop, right? I would say, right? It's kind of cool to be there. If you can get it in your shop, it's awesome to be in America. But it's really amazing to actually be in these places drinking these things. And that's another thing. What I was saying is to actually be in Europe and tasting them in their home ground is extremely special.
Beer, you're our language expert. How do you pronounce this Wiper town?
So it depends on if you're speaking French or Flemish. So it's Ypres in French, Ypres, or Yper, Ieper, if you're Flemish. And the British just call it Wiper.
Because it's a Y per.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, Christa, tell us about, in your shop, Beer Witch, great little beer bar and everything. Do you rotate through some of these Belgian beers?
All the time, especially Oberon, Thierry, De La Seine, de Rank. We always try to keep these in stock. These are the kind of beers that got me enthusiastic and interested in beer, and we're like, wow, beer is really special kind of thing. So definitely.
Anything on right now?
No. We've been having some distributor issues, but
Yeah. And you have some tap and you have some bottles.
Yes.
Yeah. And when you started in the pandemic, right?
We opened in the middle of lockdown, yes. So we started at just a bottle shop, and once we were allowed to open and serve draft beer, we've been doing that ever since. And we definitely try to focus on, my initial premise was we're going to be a Shelton Brothers bar, and I had met Bob and BR through the Legion of Osiris years ago, pre-pandemic. Right. And then, the pandemic happened and everything changed, so... But I still try to get
Shelton Brothers was even in my old place, Jimmy's Number 43, 2006, I did meet the Shelton Brothers for the first time. And very quickly, half of my taps were Shelton Brothers beers.
Yep.
I can't think of what it would have been like if I had never met them. Because it definitely changed the way that I think about beer. I met Ray Dieter because of it, and we probably wouldn't have had the radio show without Shelton Brothers. Did you know that, Joel?
No, I could have guessed, but no.
Alan, City Swiggers, man, keep going. This is fun.
You're on a roll, Alan.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you very much.
13 years. Wow.
Yeah, we will have a Tilkin keg. They were on the tour. We'll have that coming up in a couple days. And Delirium was not on the tour, but the Delirium Cafe in downtown Brussels, we have Delirium Black, which is a fun keg. But City Swiggers, we go back. How far back you want me to go?
Well, it's more of it's a bottle shop, right?
Yeah, with a bar and cafe. So I guess you call it a tap room. It's changed a lot over the years, but one thing that's been consistent is it's a neighborhood place. We're not this huge destination spot. Like a few weeks ago, you had Joe from Spuyten on. That was definitely a destination bar, especially back then. I'm one of the people who went, including for his Cantillon Fest. But we in the early days when we first opened, there were still people chasing barrel-aged imperial stouts and the latest hot IPA. That doesn't happen anymore. There's beer in every neighborhood now. But a lot of people have met there and become friends. But even that's how I met BR, going to a bar called Mug's Ale House. And that's how I met Joel, too. They after going to Mug's a long time, I realized, oh, there's a beer club here. Even though I don't brew, they're all beer lovers, and the December meeting was always a Shelton Brothers event where they bring out the portfolio, and that's really opened my eyes to great beer.
You want to tell us about the old Mugs?
Yeah, so
the December meeting, and which group was that?
It was
malted.
the Malted Barley Appreciation Society. It was a homebrewing club, and now it's more of a just beer appreciation. Most people. I mean, I haven't brewed in a bunch of years. But yeah, that's where I met Alan. And then Dan Shelton. I believe I met Dan because the club was doing, at the time, our club president, George DePiro, who's now brewing upstate, was doing a beer class, like a study and practice study for the BJCP, the Beer Judge Certification Program exam, to become a judge. And we had opened it up, the club had opened it up to the beer community in New York. So we had some people from Brooklyn Brewery, had some, distributor people, and Dan Shelton came to the class, I believe. And that's how we met Dan. And so then Dan used to come to the meeting because every month I have a different speaker, whether it was a brewery or a rep or someone, and they would always bring beer. And it somehow happened that Dan came one Christmas or one December meeting, and it became like the Christmas party. And he brought so much beer, and people would actually take the next day off from work on purpose. They knew what was coming. So it got to the point where first Dan was, well, then I got this, and then I got that, and do you think we can open a Jeroboam? And we're like, of course you can open a Jeroboam. So it got pretty out of hand. Then once Dan moved back up to Massachusetts and was no longer in Brooklyn, and I was working for Shelton Brothers, roped in Joel and Bob and I we would host it. Not quite as we cut back on the beer, but it was still a big old party.
Because Dan was driving down in a van in an ice storm, and he would arrive at Mug's, and I'd run out there to join him. We'd open up the back of the van, and the bottles would fall out into the street. He literally had like 500 bottles of different beer. We had to organize them because Dan was a little bit disorganized, but he did generously bring every Christmas beer he could find in the warehouse. And sometimes we would have 25 to 35 Christmas beers to sample. It was a pretty fun time.
It was.
I don't know if those days still exist.
Well, I do remember those, let's say late 2000s, the Shelton Brothers portfolio of Christmas beers was quite interesting. I mean, you had maybe who wants to name some of the English breweries and other breweries that made the Christmas beers?
Ridgway had a whole series with, they had a Santa's Butt, Bad Elf,
Big
Very
Bad
Bad
Elf,
Elf, Seriously Bad Elf, Insanely Bad Elf, and those progressively got stronger and stronger as you went
Those
up
are from
the badness
UK.
scale from the UK. Yeah, we have and Christa brought Père Noël from Father Christmas from Duranca from Belgium.
My personal favorite.
Yes.
Let's pop that while we talk. And what was the beer that we just had before that?
So Alan had mentioned he was going to have a keg of Tilkan at the anniversary, and so this is a bottle of Tilcan Pinot Meunier or Mirtz, and this is a lambic or blended with wine grapes. And Tilcan is on the tour. He's a friend of Shelton. He used to come to the festivals that Shelton Brothers held, although we never imported him. But we like I said, we consider him a friend of Shelton, and we added him. This year was the first year we added to the tour, right, Shelton?
Yep, he led the tour off on the Monday morning.
Correct. Yeah, and where's Tilcan located?
It's actually I'm going to make a mistake here, but I think it's just outside the Seine Valley, so it's not technically in the Seine Valley where Lambic comes from, but it's right like 50 feet away from it. So it's just southwest of Brussels, a little bit, literally 50 feet outside the proper region of the Lambic. But the beer tastes perfectly fine. You wouldn't even know that 50 feet existed.
It was a great place to start and to learn about the blending program that they had, and also how they were increasing their own production, and just start out. And your first stop is in a room full of barrels. That was. Okay, we're doing this.
Yeah. Wow. And now they're experimenting, making their own wort, right? So that's exciting.
So before they were more of a blender or
He started as a blender, yeah.
blender. And then you mentioned, so it's outside, so you start over. Outside of the Seine Valley, but how does that relate to Lambic? And
now we're getting into Michael Jackson territory a little bit.
That's why BR's here.
I mean, I think one theory is that the yeast that floats around in the air in the Seine Valley made it possible to have the beer taste as it does the Gueuze and the Lambic in that area, and that's, no one knows if that's exactly right, but the beer did survive in that region for some reason, and it can only come from there. And so literally, I was joking about the 50 feet, but I think maybe it's 60 feet. So I'm not sure, but I'm not the one to ask about.
So is Tilcan able to say they're Lambic?
There's no law.
I think because he's the blender, initially, now he's starting to produce, but when he started, he was just blending. So he was getting the unblended lambic from producers in the Seine Valley, and then blending it at his facility. So it could still technically, I believe that's how you can get around the designation there.
But otherwise it wouldn't be able to be called lambic?
I don't know.
You don't know. Alan, you were going to say something.
Just to go from there, we started there and ended at Cantillon, which I'm sure a lot of people would want to hear about. Maybe I'll leave that to you, but that was walking distance from the hotel at the very end. So I guess that's in the same. Clearly, that's a Lambic. So.
Yeah, so we hit up Dre Fontainen, blenders who have also started brewing Cantillon within Brussels proper. So those are the very super old traditional styles, and then we go from the farmhouse ales, and then we go to the hoppy ales and the bière de garde in France. Just really a good overview of all of the styles in the region.
It's great. So now we were talking about the Christmas beers. You mentioned Paris Noël. We're going to taste that next.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Let's talk about that brewery.
And what I like about this Christmas beer is it's not loaded like an American Christmas beer would have a ton of spices in it, right? We don't need that. It's just,
I don't get those.
Yeah, this one, I think, if I remember correctly, has licorice in it. But otherwise...
Yeah, it has licorice, and I want to say that there might be another spice. I might be confusing it with another one, but that we're not sure.
Right.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. They steward 16 million acres of rangeland, guided by their natural ecosystem, and are led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of their environment, both can thrive. Their team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment. These cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. The result is high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westhome.com.
Let's talk about Christmas beers. I loved like having a Belgian quad in the winter, finish off my night. And I was never really that driven to go get a Christmas beer that was spiced. Who's going to sell me on Christmas beers? Or should I just taste this?
I would say an inferior beer with spice is one of the worst things in the world. But if you have a beer with a lot of backbone, if you have a strong beer, for example, and there's spice to it, then I think it can be great. I don't think the tradition of spiced beer has much to do with let's make a cheap ale or lager and throw spices in it and people go crazy. I think there's no tradition of that, and there's no reason to make it. But I think in the old days, you would make something extra strong because of the holidays, and you'd be celebrating. Maybe the year went well, and you'd put more malt in it. It would be a stronger beer, and the spice was representative of that as well. Here's spice and malt and more alcohol, and it's a celebration. Otherwise, a spice beer doesn't work if it's a very weak beer, I think.
And this is 7%. So again, if it were an American, it'd be like what, 12, 13, 14%, right?
The problem with holiday beers, they do well until after New Year's. Even though these beers are usually better in the summer, the Great Blind Tiger used to always have a Christmas in July when the beers were peaking. But good luck selling them then. People are just done with the holidays. So you can get the transition. The pumpkin beer season is still big, not as big as it was a couple years ago. So when we're out of those, we're like, oh, we already have the Christmas beers in, so get that. But and there is some overlap, at least among the American ones, but it's a real specialty product.
Beer, anything more about the Père Noël?
Père Noël? Not particularly. I mean, this like all of the Daranka beers it's going to be hoppier. They love the hops. They use whole hop cones. They don't use pellets. They don't use extract. They don't use any sort of lupulin powder. And the label has got Santa Claus, the Santa Claus hugging a hop cone, just to let you know it's going to be hoppy. You know, it's still going to be Christmassy. It's going to be stronger. As Joel was saying, it was traditional to brew these bigger beers. Often, I think Christmas beers might have started in England. I'm not positive, but where breweries would brew them for their best clients, their best pubs, or perhaps owners. The owners would get a special batch or something to give out to friends and family. And I'm not sure exactly when the spices started coming in, but used to be just more of like a bigger beer. And it's interesting. In Shelton Brothers, for a while, we had so many Christmas beers because they were super popular, and then eventually it started to decline. But I'm noticing it's starting to come back again. People are a little more intrigued. They want, especially ones that, as Alan was saying, maybe people in their mind don't think they expire on December 26th, but maybe just say winter, which then you can carry you on through January and February, as opposed to just an actual Christmas beer.
Oh, and Alan can tell you about how hard it is to sell beer if it says Christmas and if it's already December 26th.
And it's even harder to buy it. Before I even opened the store, BR came to see me, and it was August. We definitely were going to open soon. We were very close. But she put a list in front of me, and I'm like, yeah, I've had these, but how do I order?
Well, that's the problem. The thing is I was asking my brewers in June, July, when are you brewing your Christmas beers? Because they need time to brew it. They need time to age it, especially ones that aren't just a super quick ale that might need a little bit more time in fermenting. Then we want it on the water by early September, so it arrives so that a lot of the distributors want to start getting it in by October. So, it's really hard. And people are like, well, I want to taste it. Like, I don't have it. It hasn't been brewed
and
yet.
A lot of distributors now will act you in July. Give us your holiday pre-orders. I'm like, what?
No, but that actually is important. Pre-orders are a good thing. Then nothing sits around. It comes in and goes out. No one's stuck with it. And I'm even finding that with West Coast beers. You can't just buy anything and put it on the shelf. You have to pick and choose, and the distributors want to be careful. And shipping costs are high. And
so how many? So just I want to know more about City Swiggers, because some places are working, some places aren't. Like every business, I mean, you're a neighborhood place. So how much of your sales are like bottle sales? You've got a little cafe bar. The setup, about how many different bottles do you carry?
I mean, we're still primarily to go, but I don't know, a good 15, 20%. Actually, over 20% is on premises. And you need both. I know this is sort of a New York-centric show, so I can mention a place called Beercraft in Park Slope. They came up with the concept of having beer on premises and to go. They sold a lot of cheese and sandwiches. We don't do that. It's enough work just to do what we're doing with nearly 1,000 SKUs.
When did they close? About 10 years ago? Something like that?
It was after we'd opened. But yeah, I don't know what went down there, but they did really good for a very long time. They were a destination along with a bar called The Gate, which I think is still there. For talking about old school beer places in New York City.
Yeah.
Joel, let's do a tour to all the old school bars in New York.
But
We might branch out into New York tours if the demand is there.
Well, it could be. You get some people coming in from Colorado.
Or Belgium.
But yeah, I would like to give a shout out to my wife Pam. We are a true mom and pop shop.
Yeah.
I'm in the front and doing the buying and there at night, but she's doing the back office work and a lot of the hard stuff.
Well,
and,
cheers to you. City Swiggers, 13 years. Congratulations.
And cheers to
Yeah.
Pam.
Cheers. Well, let's keep talking about the beers. We're not going to go that much longer, but we can taste a couple more and try to add a little flavor of the tour.
Yeah.
Christa, did you go to Duranka on the tour?
We did.
Tell us about your experience going to Duranka.
I mean, that was great because we had the tour guide there was actually American, right? And you guys had known him before.
Is that Casey?
Casey.
Yeah,
We've
Casey.
met him.
Yeah.
He's been here in the States and all that.
He's moving back to the States right now.
He is?
Is he?
Amazing. But it was just, again, seeing the passion of these people who work there. And we know the beer, we're excited about them, but to see them discuss and show us physically how it's made, hear the hops, smell them, rub them, go through every part of the process, which was great. Yeah.
And it's also, as much as good as these beers are, there is something about drinking them at the source when they are
They
just
definitely taste different.
so fresh.
Yeah.
It just even being there, the Duranka has a lovely newish tasting room. They have a little terrace on their upper floor on the terrace, and you look out over the farmlands and
So
over
pretty,
the part of the town. So it just also it gives you, some people. I've had people when I was at Shelton Brothers. I would get random emails of like, "Hi, I was traveling to this place in France, and I had the best beer I've ever had in my life." And I was like, part of it might just be because you were there having a great time skiing or on the Riviera, and they're like, "Can you import it?" I'm like, "Well, it's not as easy as that." But there is a lot to be said about having a beer in a time and a place, and when you have it at the source, it really just can open your perception of that beer.
But that's why we do the tours, Jimmy, because it's very important, the atmosphere. The older I get and wiser, the more I realize the atmosphere matters as much as the beer. No? Am I saying that wrong? Who says...
Well, I say when I look at the Instagram of the inner city beer tours,
Inner Circle.
Inner Circle,
Inner City.
yeah, well, that would be the New York one.
Inner City,
different
that's the
tour.
new
Yeah.
company.
That's-
I see an idea here.
That's right. You could go to city breweries, but I see pictures of dogs
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
rustic country places, maybe old castles in there too, and
Yeah.
other things like that. I know you go to Scotland and you seem to like the images of these old distilleries. It's like a front, and behind it is a giant,
It's the atmosphere.
massive
It's the
industrial
atmosphere, yeah.
facility.
Don't forget
But there's a lot to be said for it. People do have reasons they love beers because they've had these experiences, and traveling is great. And BR and I, we're nuts about traveling, so that's why we do this. But people who go, sometimes you have to be dragged over there. But when they do it, then they go, "Oh my God, that was the greatest time of my life."
Chris, the top 3
Yeah.
breweries that you visited on the tour,
let's talk about.
based on the experience and the beer.
Can we talk about what's for Legend? Is that a secret
No,
experience?
that's what we're drinking right now. I brought a bottle back, and we are having the famous West Veteran 12. Please.
Joel, are we allowed to talk
Again,
about that?
this tour, if you take the same tour, it'll be slightly different every time. But maybe Joel can speak to. We got the very special privilege, which I know is.
So it's
we'll all
West.
remember.
It seemed like forever this was something that beer sherpers and people would talk about so much, but I always felt like I had more than enough beers coming in through Shelton Brothers that I never had to worry about getting
Well,
a beer that I couldn't get.
West Veteran only came in once for us. We were the reason we do it on the tour. It's also near some of our breweries anyway, so it's convenient. But we did import it, and so we feel like we specialize in going to breweries we imported from. It's very different from the other ones. They sent it to us once. We got in trouble because some people didn't get it, and so they were angry and all this nonsense. But But it also shows you the different kind of styles you can get in a very small region. So BR mentioned the farmhouse and the lambics and everything, and we also go to a Trappist brewery. So all of this in a few days, and it's great. And West Flatiron's right near Thierry, right near Streuza, right near Ypres, and so it's really, you can have an amazing day there, just going short distances between one or the other.
So, Christa, we're tasting right now the West Flatiron. Is that how you pronounce it?
West Flatiron.
West
West
Flatiron.
And this is the 12.
And with your because Christa's an expert taster. What are you now? Are you a BJCP judge?
Provisionary, still got to take the
Provisionary.
exam. Yeah.
So what am I tasting? Is there candied sugar? I mean, what?
You're getting the dried fruit, candy, sugared fruit. I'm getting like currants, prunes. Just so good. And something so specific about the yeast, right?
The yeast
Yeah.
really adds character.
Yeah. It's something you can only get there. And again, the experience that we had with the muck was amazing.
Well, to be honest, we got a tour with a monk last year, and I thought, wow, this is the coolest thing. And they switched monks this year, and he said, no more tour now. So we're not going inside with the monk.
Usually we just go to the
No,
cafe.
we knew that was a special thing.
Yeah, it was once in
the
a
one
lifetime.
time, yeah.
But being there in general is just great.
So you're saying
And,
because the monk gave you the tour, he got in trouble and he can never do it again?
I'm not sure if the monks fight. They shouldn't, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, we had a nice monk. The meaner monk took over now, and he said, no, we're not going to do it. It doesn't take away from the tour too much if we don't get to go
No,
see
well,
it.
so normally we always go to, there's a cafe across the street where you can drink. We maybe have a lunch stop there, and it's in the fields. It's beautiful. And then we just show the outside of the monastery, but we have never gone in. I mean, it's a monastery, but this year, Dan Shelton, along with Nino from Duranca, managed to talk to the brother and got us in on a tour. We're not allowed to post any images to social media, and I think everyone on the tour has respected that. I haven't seen anything pop up, but
We're very impressed with our guests there. Yeah.
It was an interesting stop. And then, as Joel mentioned, we then go to Destroysa with Urban, the crazy brewer, who basically opens up the taps to us and says, "You guys know." You guys know how to pour beer. Do it yourself. So
Didn't he have
kind
to
of the
brew or
anti-monk.
something, right? He just disappeared for like 2 hours, right?
yeah, so he takes people around the brewery and lets everyone else just pour themselves their 11%, 15% Black Albert or whatever Imperial Stout he's got on.
So that day builds from going to a military cemetery to going to Thierry, which is very placid and very civilized. And then we go to West Flatiron and we start to have a few strong Trappists. And then we go to Streuza, which is complete bedlam.
Wow. Well, Alan, you're a caller. Come on. Now, West Flatiron.
There you go.
You were there.
Yeah,
Tell us about the beer.
Okay, well, the beer that
It tastes
the
like
Shelton
Trappist.
brothers brought in, it was there was a fire in the chapel, and they needed to rebuild the roof, which we got to see, and it was beautiful, and the sound inside was quite impressive, and I got a nice. They sold us a bunch of 6-packs, or I forget how it came, or they sold us box sets with glassware, which we had to sell that way. And a bunch of people who didn't know anything about beer came really early to resell it, whatever. So of course we held some back and gave single bottles away to our customers and sold it and hung on to them for quite a while. So it did get distributed around quietly, but they felt a kinship with this tour and Joel because of what they had done for them to bring in so much money. So we actually had to sell the beer at cost. So we had to have people bring cash because of the credit card fees. So went with a big stack of cash right over to Chase Bank once the sale was over. That's my story. But no, so
this was to help raise money for their roof that burned.
yeah, and
right.
no, it was. I've never been to a monastery, so I don't know what they're like, but really kind people, and just they take us back around to the back wall.
And they only make 3 beers,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, actually, this is the strong one, but the lighter
But
ones.
tell me about the beers.
The lighter ones were better.
I've never had it before.
And the only thing we didn't see the brewery. You could kind of see a window on the second floor, so we didn't get to. It's the only place we didn't see the brewery, but we did see everything else.
The monk who was the head brewer was on a hermitage retreat, so he had several days of he wasn't speaking. He was solitary, alone. meditating. So he didn't want anyone else to give the tour. He wanted to be the one to give the tour. So we saw it from the outside, but we got a tour of the grounds.
Beer, as a beer person, beer expert. I mean, I love Trappist beers. How is this different from some of the other Trappist beers and monk beers that you guys have sold?
I mean, they're all different. I mean, part of what's Bletteren's appeal is because you cannot get it in the U.S. So it's become elevated and hyped. It's a wonderful beer. It's a delicious beer, whether it's the this one or the 8, some of the lower ABV ones. They're all delicious. They're wonderful. Is it the best beer in the world, which this one was at a time? That's debatable because there are other very good Trappist beers as well in Belgium. But it's still a wonderful beer. The complexity of it, it's very balanced. It's not too hot. It's a strong alcohol beer, but it's not overly hot. There aren't like crazy esters and phenols. The ones that do come in provide like a nice balanced flavor and aroma to it. And as Christa was mentioning, the dried fruits and the sugars and the plums and the currants, and the very almost like caramel notes to it. It's a delicious beer.
Let's toast to it while you talk, Alan. Keep talking.
St. Bernardus App 12 is
and in their tap room, they only serve bottled, right?
Yeah, it's not on draft. No.
Yeah, they don't have it on draft, so they're just bringing everyone bottled. And that tap room was enormous.
It's
family-style tables of like 15, 20, and we were probably, all of us, the youngest people there by 20 years.
Yes, it used to be a much smaller cafe. The first time I had gone there, pre-Shelton Brothers, just traveling on my own. My husband and I had gone there, and it was, again, we passed a group of probably 70 or 80-something-year-olds on a bike tour.
Amazing.
Who then ended up at like 11 a.m. That was their destination, was this old cafe that looked like it was probably built in the 40s or 50s. They've since expanded. It's huge now.
1940s?
Yes.
1640s? What?
1940s.
There's a classical radio station I listen to out of Boston, WCRB, and the other day the lady says, we're doing the 24s today. We're doing greatest hits of 1624, 1724, 1824, 1924, and 2024. So you never know with history, right?
To go back, BR mentioned Dry Fontaine, or however you pronounce it correctly, briefly, and that was very interesting because due to climate change and the wind, they actually had to move the brewery up the hill into the city center. So you can only brew a few times a year, and you have to open it up to the air. Maybe we can discuss more a little bit how the lambic is made.
Do we have a Dry Fontaine?
I didn't bring it.
The last time I did a Battle of the Belgians at Jimmy's number 43, was the Dry Fontaine was the number one beer.
I
So
apologize for not bringing one.
no, that's okay.
I love
Who wants to tell me about Dry Fontaine? Because it's the great lambic. Joel, Christa.
No, I can't say too much, but
But you can say too much.
I went with my brother in the late '90s when the Shelton Brothers was first forming, and I was just sort of hanging around. I didn't join right away, but I remember traveling around, and we met Armand de Belder, who was the guy who was doing blending there, and this eventually morphed into a brewery. Dan encouraged him to do what he was doing, and later encouraged him to do the brewery. And unfortunately, he passed away recently. He did come to say hi to us on our tour in 2019. Before that happened, it's a complicated history with us because it got kind of like a big operation now, where it wasn't even a brewery originally; it was a blendery. But now, it's really huge, and it was just starting to grow when we were kind of crashing in the 2020. But BR knows more about this exact details than I do, I'm sure. But
And then, just fill us in on Dry Fontaine, and then keep going, talking more about the tradition of blending in his lambic.
Yeah, also mention how they've split the brewery from the barrel aging room.
Right. So initially, I don't know if it was Armand Beller's father or perhaps even his grandfather who were blenders. So this was a traditional thing where you would have lambic brewers and lambic blenders. And the blenders were the ones who would take barrels from the different breweries, blend them to their own specifications, decide, this one needs a little bit more of this, the 1 year, the 2 year, or the 3 year. And then eventually...
Like in France and wine, like
Exactly,
negociants.
yeah. So they were in this little town, Beersel, a very, very small town to the south of Brussels in the Seine Valley. And eventually Armand started brewing. He really enjoyed the Franconian lagers, and that was, I think, the impetus for him starting a brewery, was to brew some lagers that he wanted to drink. He had the Beersel Blonde, and then I think a Beersel Amber as well.
And a lot of the Belgian brewers really love Franconian lagers, and we feel like that was always a connection for us, and we still go to Franconia. And that's a side note, but it's very important actually, because the quality of the two things, the Belgian beers and the Franconian beers, most people don't make that connection so much. But I'm glad you mentioned it.
Does Dan live there? Or?
Dan lives in Franconia, yes.
So Dre Fontaine eventually started Lambico Drome is what they call it. It's a separate barrel aging facility. And they've gotten very also involved in sustainable agriculture. They are working with local local farmers to get the grain and the hops and the fruits. They're growing their own fruits, their own fruit trees. And so now, as Joel said, it's a pretty big operation. I mean, for a brewery of that size, I mean, it's still, on the scale of some American breweries, pretty small. But Werner, who gives us the tour, is extremely knowledgeable on it all. It gives very in depth, and as Alan was saying, talks about climate change. And we noticed this also at Cantillon, where traditionally you would brew, say, October through April. April, I think, was the last brew, but they're finding they're having to brew maybe November through March, and it's just this creep of where it's just not cold enough for them to make this to get the wort cooled down to the appropriate temperature without introducing too much outside bacteria and other wild yeast. They want the native wild yeast that they have that have already colonized. So that's changing a lot there with C.
And I believe they were just certified organic too, right? Didn't
right.
Say, yeah.
So
climate change could jeopardize some of these
for the traditional
cultural
brewers. Yes.
Things.
Yeah, because it's already a time and labor, time intensive beer, because you are blending 1, 2, and 3-year-old beers. So just because you brew it doesn't mean it can be released. So they still have to wait until everything has been blended. Or aged and then blended. So if you have a shorter brewing window, that means you're making less beer. And it's not like they can just brew it somewhere else. It has to be done in the cool ship, or the wort is cooled in the cool ship. The resident yeast colonize it or ferment it, and then they have to age it. And sometimes the temps are too hot for the aging. They've had also issues of barrels just going bad because the temperatures are too high.
There are some great traditions, and I'm really glad you shared them with us. And really proud to have you in the room. I'll say what was great about these traditions. Let's give a shout out to some of the American brewers that maybe are learning from it. I know came in Mike Amity at Roberta's, opened a bottle of Suarez's. What was it? It was buckwheat saison. Mm-hmm. But that had some qualities of what were the qualities? A little bit of wild beer.
Some tartness, yes.
Tartness. Are there any American breweries that you guys can think of right now that are doing something interesting?
Fermented, Primitive Beer is doing their own thing, and their stuff is tasting really good.
Allagash has been working on a long. I remember I was many years ago was in Belgium with it wasn't even, I don't even want to say it was a precursor to the Inner Circle Beer Tour or the Insider Tours. It was just a group of us who had gone over, and Tom Peters from Monks was there, and Rob Todd from Allagash was there, and we went to an event called the Night of the Great Thirst, and everyone, there was a bunch of lambic producers, and I remember Rob said he had brought a bottle of one of his beers. They had just started experimenting with open fermentation and wild yeast, and he says, I don't want to open this. These beers, it was just to see, he was in, everyone was in awe of what these Belgian producers were making, but he's definitely dialed in now. Those guys, he and Jason Perkins have really gone ahead.
They used to call it Cool Ship Project.
Exactly.
Is that what they still
I believe
call
it still is, yeah. And that's, even though it's not in the Zen Valley, it's very close to what you'll get over in Belgium.
Other American breweries that you guys want to give a shout out to?
Primitive. And again, they can't technically call it lambic, but they're doing their thing, and they're tasting great. Just people don't know them, and also it takes time. Cantillon and places like that have been around how many years?
Does Plan B? Do you get any Plan B, Alan?
Yeah, Plan B is available. I actually have their hot pepper one right now.
And they're doing some kinds of wild beers.
Yeah, I've never been. I've know people have gone up there, and they say it's worth the trip if you're ever in the area. But these days it's harder to sell the high-end bottles, but the beer is amazing if you can.
And
Go
more
for
and
it.
more American brewers are using a cool ship. Jester King has one, Oxbow's got one. More and more brewers are, even if they still have their main line of beers, they're experimenting with cool ships. And using, not necessarily inoculating it with a yeast culture, but seeing what they can get.
And OEC, they do cool shit for everything. Yeah.
So we're gonna make a toast to Roberta's Pizza. 15 years they've hosted this
Cheers.
studio for Heritage Radio Network in this little back room in Bushwick in the location. Big shout out to them, Brandon Hoy and the whole team. Thanks so much for having us all these years. We're gonna go inside and have a dinner. This might be our last show in the studio for a while. Beer Sessions Radio is going to keep going, and so is Heritage Radio Network. But, a lot of things change. But so many of the shows in our network have been recording online for years now and remote and other things. So you might not be in the studio the rest of this year, but, we're going to keep doing shows and everything. And but I want to say, the one thing I want to say is about the quality of craft beverages, in this time, was one community that you can rally around. It seems like the whole craft beverage community. People are kind and nice. The other day, my friends at Eden Cider in Vermont posted a cool photo of all their workers in the orchard. And, politics aside, they are all saying the craft beverage community is a good community and there's a lot of good people. So, when my daughter's 22 now, and reflecting on changes and trends in the industry, and when I first started in the industry, I was tasting wines, and then I discovered all the great Belgian beers, and later I've gotten into cider. But the beers that we taste on the show, the beers that we in the industry get to drink, like these Belgian beers, and talking about Suarez and Plan B and Allagash and Cool Ships and other things, these beers are just as interesting as co-ferments and natural wines and ciders, and some of there's such an overlap, right? I mean, let's finish this up by talking about what fermenting is. And just how interesting it can be. So if you like a natural wine that has, it's a fermented fruit beverage, how far off is that from a, wild fermented beer?
I mean, that's
aside
how we
from
get our
Chris-
wine customers. If someone's like, "Oh, I want wine," it's like, "Okay, sure, we have that, but have you ever had a lambic with fruit and grape skins? The bridge between natural wine and spontaneous fermented beer." It's so close. And I like beer better because the ABV is lower.
Yeah, and plenty of people say, "Oh, I'm not really a beer person. I'm a wine person." And you taste them on some of these more wild ales, the ones that are more balanced, the ones that aren't just like super acetic and way over the top sour. What people think, like, "Oh, I don't like sour beers," but beers that are refined and more balanced, and like, "Oh, this is really good," and they pair so well with food. I mean, I think that's always when I've gone to some of the more high-end restaurants and I'm meeting with a beverage director who's perhaps from a sommelier background and not so much from a beer background, and then I taste them on the beers, some of these wild beers, and explain this pairs with so many more different types of food than, say, just a red wine or a white wine could. It can match up with an acidic food. It can match up with a rich food. The carbonation helps lift, if there's something, if you got something very heavy and cream based. If you got a carbonation of whether it's a lambic or a wild ale or a saison, can really lighten up that meal. On the other hand, you can also have it with a salad, and you're not going to, the beer's not going to taste very like vinegar, because like a wine might with a very strong vinaigrette. And so there's just I feel that there's a lot more room to pair beers with food, and again, opening up people's minds who might like wine, like, "Oh no, try these wild ales. They fit into the sort of the natural wine, a little bit funky, a little bit different."
A lot of people, they'll try them and they'll say, "That's not beer." They know lagers and IPAs, but when you give them this very small percentage of beer, that this is what is for them.
That's my favorite, when they taste a beer and they're like, "I didn't know beer could taste like this."
Let's make a toast to the world of beer and ferments and everything else. And thank you guys for joining me
Thanks, Jimmy.
on Heritage
you.
Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni, and big shout out to BR, Christa, Alan, and Joel. And Joel, how do you find out more about the Inner Circle beer tours for 2025?
Well, you just go to www.innercircletours.com You can even email me directly, info@innercircletours.com. Because I love getting emails because I don't get enough.
And the last thing I'm going to say is, Joel Shelton, I know your career has been a musician.
Yes.
And from what I understand, musicians, when they go on tour, get to hang out with each other and come up with really bad jokes. So you get to end with a really bad joke tonight.
I'd never heard that tradition, Jimmy. A really bad joke? I don't remember any jokes.
That's the joke. Thank
There
you
you
so
go.
much.
There you go.
A big shout out to our engineer, Gabe. Thanks so much for being with us. Catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. Thanks for 15 years, guys. We'll see you again. Woo! Thank you, guys. Hope we handled that well.